I can still feel the rush of adrenaline and the icy grip of panic that seized me in those moments after I realized my colossal mistake. It's a story that I've rarely shared, partly out of lingering embarrassment and partly because the memory still has the power to make me break out in a cold sweat. But it's also a tale that taught me a valuable lesson about the perils of our digital age and the importance of caution in our most intimate moments. It was a Friday night, and I was home alone, my girlfriend away on a business trip. We'd been apart for a week, and the distance was starting to wear on both of us. Our text conversations had been getting increasingly flirtatious throughout the day, each message ratcheting up the tension and anticipation for her return the following evening. As the night wore on and I finished my second glass of wine, I found myself in a particularly frisky mood. The combination of alcohol, loneliness, and pent-up desire clouded my judgment. I decided that a simple text wasn't enough. I wanted to surprise my girlfriend with something more visual. Without giving it much thought, I stripped down and positioned myself in front of my bedroom mirror. I spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to find the right angle, sucking in my stomach and flexing muscles I didn't even know I had. Finally, satisfied with my pose, I snapped the photo. I quickly pulled up our text conversation and, with a mischievous grin, hit send. My heart was racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I imagined her reaction, the surprise, the delight, maybe even a reciprocal photo if I was lucky. But as the seconds ticked by with no response, an uneasy feeling began to creep over me. She usually replied almost instantly to my messages, especially when things got flirty. I checked my phone again, making sure the message had gone through. That's when I saw it. The number at the top of the conversation was off by one digit. In that moment, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My stomach dropped, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I hadn't sent the photo to my girlfriend. I'd sent it to a complete stranger. Panic set in as the full implications of what I'd done hit me. A random person now had an intimate photo of me. My mind raced through all the possible scenarios, each one worse than the last. What if they shared it online? What if they somehow figured out who I was and tried to blackmail me? What if they sent it to my contacts? With shaking hands, I quickly typed out a message explaining the mistake and begging them to delete the photo. The wait for a response felt like an eternity. When my phone finally buzzed, I almost dropped it in my haste to read the reply. The response was not what I had hoped for. Instead of understanding or assurance, I was met with amusement. They laughed it off, making a joke about how this was the most interesting wrong number they'd ever received. My pleas for them to delete the photo were met with vague promises and more jokes. That night was one of the longest of my life. Sleep was impossible as my mind conjured up increasingly horrific scenarios. I imagined the photo circulating online, showing up on my family's social media feeds, being sent to my boss. Every buzz of my phone sent a jolt of fear through me. The next few weeks were a nightmare of paranoia and anxiety. I found myself constantly checking social media, terrified that I'd see my ill-advised photo pop up. I jumped every time my phone rang, convinced it would be someone calling to tell me they'd seen the picture. I even considered changing my number, but I knew that wouldn't undo what had already been done. Telling my girlfriend was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. When she returned from her trip, I sat her down and, with a heavy heart, confessed what had happened. I expected anger, maybe even for her to break up with me on the spot. Instead, she listened with a mixture of shock, concern, and, eventually, understanding. While she was hurt that I had intended to send such a photo without her consent, she was more worried about the potential consequences of my mistake. As the weeks turned into months with no sign of the photo surfacing, I slowly began to relax. The constant fear began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of relief and an even deeper appreciation for how lucky I had been. The stranger, whoever they were, had apparently kept their word and deleted the photo, or at least had the decency not to share it. But even as the immediate danger passed, the experience left a lasting impact on me. It taught me several valuable lessons that I carry with me to this day. First and foremost, I learned the importance of consent and communication in relationships, especially when it comes to sharing intimate photos. I realized that my impulsive decision to send that photo, even if it had reached my girlfriend as intended, was a violation of her trust. We hadn't discussed or agreed to share that kind of content, and I had no right to assume she would want to receive it. Secondly, the incident drove home the risks inherent in our digital age. Once something is sent, it's out of your control. No matter how much you might trust the intended recipient, there's always the potential for photos to be shared, either intentionally or accidentally. The permanence of digital content means that a moment's indiscretion can have long-lasting consequences. I also learned the crucial importance of double-checking everything before hitting send. Whether it's an email, a text, or especially an intimate photo, taking those extra few seconds to verify the recipient can save you from a world of trouble. It's a habit I've cultivated religiously since that night, and it's saved me from numerous, albeit less dramatic, mistakes. The experience also made me more aware of the potential legal implications of sexting, especially when it comes to minors. While in my case the unintended recipient was an adult, I realized how easily such a mistake could have had much more severe consequences if the wrong number had belonged to someone underage. Perhaps most importantly, this incident taught me a valuable lesson about the relationship between technology and intimacy. While digital communication can be a wonderful tool for maintaining connections over distances, it's no substitute for genuine, in-person intimacy. The desire to bridge the physical gap between my girlfriend and me had led to a lapse in judgment that could have had disastrous consequences. In the years since that night, I've become an advocate for digital safety and responsible online behavior. I've shared my story, anonymously, with younger relatives and friends, hoping that my mistake can serve as a cautionary tale. I stress the importance of thinking critically about the content we create and share, and the potential long-term consequences of our digital actions. My relationship with my girlfriend, thankfully, survived this incident. In fact, in some ways, it made us stronger. The experience opened up important conversations about trust, boundaries, and expectations in our relationship. We established clear guidelines about what we were and weren't comfortable sharing digitally, and made a pact to prioritize in-person intimacy over digital substitutes. Today, as I navigate the ever-evolving landscape of digital communication, I carry the lessons of that night with me. Every time I'm about to send a message or share a photo, I pause. I double-check the recipient. I consider the potential consequences. And more often than not, I decide that some things are better said in person. The memory of that night still has the power to make me cringe. The fear and anxiety I felt in those weeks of uncertainty are not something I'd wish on anyone. But I'm also grateful for the wake-up call it provided. In an age where so much of our lives are lived online, where the line between public and private is increasingly blurred, it served as a stark reminder of the importance of caution, consent, and mindfulness in our digital interactions. So to anyone reading this, let my experience be a warning. Think twice before you send that risqué photo. Double-check the recipient. Consider the potential consequences. And remember that while technology can bring us closer in many ways, it's no substitute for genuine, face-to-face connection. As for me, I've learned my lesson. These days, if I'm feeling frisky and want to surprise my partner, I opt for a good old-fashioned love letter. It might be less exciting than a racy photo, but it's a whole lot safer. And in the end, isn't that what really matters?